Thank you everyone for being here today. Let me start by echoing Dr. Gavaya's, apology for the late start today. Can you hear me? Okay. Hello? That's better? Okay, wonderful. I must say it is truly a privilege to be here today to talk about professional psychology. If you've been reading the newspapers in the last few days, you would have seen the announcements about UG's launch of the psychology program, but also the topics that have been discussed here. Both Dr. Adacrow and Ms. Reynolds talked about the importance of understanding what's going on. So with that reality in mind, our president, Dr. Omowale Amulero Marshall, thought it would be really useful to share a little information about what is psychology and what do we actually do. So in doing that, I'm going to talk also about regional psychology, but also global psychology to highlight the fact that we are a part of a global community that is working collectively to address the needs of all people. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to say that psychology is a young discipline. Do them all one. Thank you. Is a young discipline, young in the sense that we only got started in 1879, but we've been growing at an amazing pace around the world, and now psychology is in every country around the world. A brand new discipline, but significant impact in all sectors, in all countries around the world. Now, we usually think of disciplines in terms of one profession. It's almost as if psychology is made up of multiple professions because we have so many different specialties in psychology. When people think of psychology, we most often think of clinical psychology, which is the focus of the graduate program that is being planned at UG. But I'd like to draw your attention to the slide where I've highlighted just a few of the major specialties in psychology. And while they all contribute to human development, we do different things. We work in different places. We also have different skill sets. So it's important to recognize, for example, that your social psychologist is not a clinician. Your developmental psychologist is not a clinician. So we have those who are clinicians, those who are researchers, those who work primarily in academic setting, those who engage in strategic planning, those who are in the diplomatic corps. So again, we engage in a range of activities, but not all of us are clinicians. But clinical psychology is the focus of the program here at UG, in part because it works directly with addressing mental health challenges. Despite the diversity that is psychology, we are a single discipline. And on the right-hand side, I've highlighted some of those things that reflect the unity that is psychology. The first thing I'd like to stress is the training and the qualifications. When we finish our first degree in psychology, usually the bachelor's degree in psychology, we move on to graduate school. And that graduate school is where we specialize. So a degree in developmental psychology has a different curriculum than a degree in clinical psychology, a different curriculum than a degree in social psychology. So that's where the qualifications are important, because we need a master's degree, first of all, to be considered a psychologist, but the type of degree that you actually hold based on your training determines the types of professional activities in which you can engage. So, for example, an industrial organizational psychologist who might work in industry or in large corporations does not provide clinical services. Now, so training and qualification unite us all, but I also like to stress that we have a code of ethical principles that also unite us. We're talking about recognizing the inherent dignity of persons and peoples, competent caring for the well-being of persons and people. Integrity is a core principle of our discipline, as is professional responsibility to society. Professional responsibility to society above and beyond your own personal well-being. The third point there is the Declaration of Core Competencies of Professional Psychology. What this means is we've moved to the point where we can define what are the things that professional psychology should be able to do. Notice it is a declaration that is international, agreed to by our major international organizations, and is to facilitate the development of a strong, united professional identity. But very importantly, it is supposed to also help us develop an international recognition system so that we can equate training programs in different countries. So very much a united discipline. Now, we started in 1879. Psychology varies around the world in a lot of ways, focusing on, depending on our historical context, depending on resources, depending on political situations, but we have moved to become this global profession because of the work of our international organizations. One key such organization is the International Union of Psychological Science. So the International Union of Psychological Science is, let's say, the UN of psychology. The UN of Psychology in the sense that it is made up of national members from around the world. So the IUCIS has 90 national country members. As with our organization, there is one representative from each country. So I'm from the Bahamas, so the Bahamas Psychological Association is a member, the Grenadian Psychological Association is a member, so you have members from all regions of the world. And on this slide, I've highlighted the other category of engagement with IUCIS. So in addition to national members, you have what we call regional affiliates. And our regional organization, CANPA, is a regional affiliate of IUCIS. What that means is that we're very much engaged with psychology on a global level. Now, I couldn't quite talk about psychology without highlighting the notion of violence. And Dr. Adu Crow presented on suicide in Guyana. And Ms. Reynolds took another perspective in looking at youth, gangs, and violence. Now, psychologists have, for the longest period, been engaged in violence through a range of activities, through our research, through program design, through evaluation of programs, so that we can answer some of the questions that you've raised as what is going on under the surface? Why is it happening? So research is one of the core components of psychology, not only in our activities, but in our training. Go back just for a minute. So to highlight that, on this slide, I'm showing you the UN's model, the World Health Organization's model for understanding violence. And I'd like to just highlight that this model that is being utilized by the World Health Organization and its various regional organizations really comes from the psychology literature. The work of a psychologist, I'll tell you the name, but those of you who may not have the psychology background may not remember it, but his name is Yuri Bronfenbrenner. So psychologists have been very critical in helping us understand what we know about violence, but also how we intervene. But our research or our intervention is not limited just to our theory and our research at the individual level. We also pay attention, increasingly so, to human development at the global level. So you now have psychologists who are engaging with the UN and other organizations to promote community development and to promote global development. I know many of us remember the Millennium Development Goals. Do you remember the Millennium Development Goals? Now we've passed that era and we're into the era of the Sustainable Development Goals. But we've had our psychologists who have been looking at how violence really affected how we achieve the Millennium Development Goals. And psychologists are now beginning to bring that same focus to the Sustainable Development Goals. And on this slide, I have a few examples of the types of research or activities in which psychologists, first of all, in the global community, have been engaging in. And I'd just like to point out that you can see that this is not new behavior. We've been engaging in this behavior for a while. But I highlight the last one there on the left-hand side, which was, again, another global call for action, collective action by psychologists. That's at the global level. But of course, Caribbean psychologists have also been engaged in violence research. There was a conference that was held in the US Virgin Islands in 1959. In 1959, that looked at Caribbean children and their well-being. Psychologists were there. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, violence was on the agenda. So some of the same issues that you've raised were discussed at that conference as well. So we have this long history of engagement, but now we're moving to the point where we're enhancing our ability to work collectively to address these issues. We might have individuals who are doing good work in their individual countries, but that's not enough. As Ms. Reynolds demonstrated, many of our countries are having challenges. So in order to address these challenges, we must work together. We must draw on our various strengths to meet the challenges of 21st century living in the Caribbean. This was an example of a really good project that demonstrated how Caribbean psychologists have been involved in gender-based violence. But in the interest of time, I'm going to skip that and move on to the next major point that I want to make. Okay, and that point is what we like to call a new era in Caribbean psychology. As we're looking now at a global psychology, Caribbean psychology has grown to the point where we are directly engaging with the global psychological community. And on this slide, I have just two brief examples. There are more that I can share with you, but I wanted to give you a sense of that Caribbean psychology, those of us who are in this room and those of us who are unable to join, are a part of a global effort to promote human well-being. Just one quick point, as you can see on this slide, the right column, that the focus is on Caribbean psychology and their attention to the Sustainable Development Goals. So you can see that we are part of the global development conversation. I'm almost there. So finally, we are committed, that is Caribbean psychology, to developing a Caribbean psychological framework, one that addresses the unique challenges, the historical, the social, the cultural realities of the Caribbean to promote our overall well-being. Mental health, suicide, and youth violence are priority developed areas for professional psychologists. I should also point that we are well positioned for further growth as a science, and with our colleagues, not only in the global community, but in other regions, we are able to and ready to make a difference to the story of Caribbean peoples and, by extension, the human story. Thank you very much.